Some players are immortalized through goals, others through trophies. But some leave their mark in battles fought, tackles won, and the silent respect of those who played alongside them. Remi Moses was one of those players, a midfielder who never sought the spotlight but became the backbone of Manchester United in the 1980s. He wasn't just a workhorse, he was a fighter, the enforcer who made sure United had steel behind their flair. His tackles were thunderous, his presence unshakable. In an era when football was a war of attrition, Moses thrived. He was part of the foundation Ron Atkinson built at Old Trafford, a player who made others shine by doing the dirty work. And yet, history has a cruel way of overlooking those who don't demand attention. Moses didn't get the grand farewell, the endless adulation, or the legacy his contributions deserved. Injuries stole his career, and with time, his name faded from football's mainstream memory. But why? How does a player so vital to Manchester United's resurgence become a forgotten figure? What made him special in the first place, and what went so tragically wrong? To understand, we have to go back to where it all began, before Old Trafford, before West Brom, before the injuries that changed everything. Miles Platting, Manchester, a working-class district where toughness wasn't just a trait, it was survival. This was where Remi Moses was born in 1960. Football wasn't a luxury here, it was an escape, a way to fight, to prove yourself, to carve a path forward. And from an early age, it was clear, Moses wasn't just playing football. He was built for it. The game in the late 70s wasn't for the weak. It was rough, brutal, and demanded players with heart as much as talent, and Moses had both. He honed his craft at West Bromwich Albion, a club undergoing its own transformation. English football was still wrestling with racial prejudice, but West Brom was at the forefront of change. Cyril Regis, Laurie Cunningham, and now Remi Moses. A trio that didn't just play football, they shattered barriers. Moses stood out, not just for what he represented, but for what he brought to the pitch. A relentless ball winner, a fierce competitor, and a midfielder who could dictate the tempo of a game. His ability to read play, break up attacks, and drive his team forward made him a key piece in Ron Atkinson's West Brom side. But talent like his wasn't meant to stay in one place for long. In 1981, Atkinson left West Brom to take over at Manchester United, and he knew exactly who he needed to bring with him. Remi Moses wasn't just another signing, he was a statement. But stepping into Old Trafford was different. Bigger club, bigger expectations, bigger pressure. Would he rise to the occasion, or would the weight of Manchester United be too much? Stepping into Old Trafford wasn't just about wearing the shirt. It was about proving you belonged. Manchester United wasn't a club that waited for players to settle in. Either you adapted or you disappeared. And for Remi Moses, there was no second option. From the moment he stepped onto the pitch, he made his presence known. United had plenty of attacking flair, but what they lacked was steel. Moses brought exactly that. Hard tackles, relentless pressing, and an unmatched work rate. He was the enforcer that gave United their edge. He wasn't just a ball winner, he was a difference maker. With his aggression and intelligence, he allowed others to play their game. And when paired with Bryan Robson, United had one of the most fearsome midfield partnerships in the country. If you got past one, the other was waiting. Opponents knew facing United meant facing a battle in midfield, and Moses was at the heart of it. But he wasn't all destruction. Under Ron Atkinson, United played expressive, attacking football, and Moses adapted. He had the technical ability to carry the ball forward, pick the right passes, and control the tempo when needed. His versatility made him indispensable. When United lifted the FA Cup in 1983, Moses was a key figure. His performances helped take United back to winning ways, proving that this was a team on the rise. He wasn't the biggest name, but he was one of the most crucial pieces in Atkinson's project. But football has a way of changing when you least expect it. Just as Moses was cementing himself as a core figure in United's resurgence, something began to shift. And this time, it wasn't just about football. Football is brutal, not just in its physical demands, but in how quickly fortunes can change. One moment, you're untouchable. The next, you're watching from the sidelines, powerless. For Remi Moses, the turning point came not from a loss of form, but from something far worse, his own body betraying him. The aggressive, all-action style that made him invaluable also put him at constant risk. Injuries are an occupational hazard for any footballer, but for someone who played like Moses, throwing himself into every challenge, fighting for every ball, the toll was inevitable. Knee problems started creeping in. At first they were setbacks, frustrating but manageable. Then they became something more. What should have been temporary injuries turned into long-term concerns. Surgeries followed. Rehab became a routine. The cycle was endless. Recovery, return, another breakdown. Each time Moses fought back. Each time he refused to let go. But the body has limits. By the mid-1980s, it was clear. His career was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For a player whose game was built on intensity, losing that edge was devastating. He wasn't the type to take half measures. If he couldn't play the way he always had, was he even the same player? By 1988, the answer was painfully clear. At just 28 years old, Remi Moses was forced to retire. A career that should have lasted years longer, cut short, not because he lacked the talent, not because he had lost his hunger, but because his body simply wouldn't let him continue. One of Manchester United's most vital figures in the early 1980s was gone. No grand farewell, no testimonial, just the harsh reality of football moving on without him. But even as the game left him behind, one question remained. Why is his name barely spoken today? Football history is filled with names that echo through time. Some players live on in highlight reels, in statues outside stadiums, in endless debates about the greatest of all time. But what happens to those who were just as vital, yet somehow fade into obscurity? Remi Moses wasn't a fringe player. He wasn't a squad member who came and went. He was a key part of Manchester United's revival under Ron Atkinson, a midfielder who gave everything for the badge. And yet his name is rarely mentioned among club legends. Why? Injuries played a part. When a player's career ends early, their legacy often doesn't get the chance to solidify. He wasn't around when Alex Ferguson built his dynasty, so his name wasn't woven into that era's success story. Football moves forward, and those who aren't part of the next chapter often get left behind. But maybe it's also because of the type of player he was. Moses wasn't the goal scorer who made headlines. He wasn't the playmaker who dazzled crowds. He was the enforcer, the fighter, the one who did the dirty work so others could shine. These players rarely get the recognition they deserve. Yet ask those who played alongside him, and they'll tell you, Manchester United wouldn't have been the same without him. His partnership with Bryan Robson set the foundation for the club's midfield dominance. His presence gave United the steel they needed in a physically ruthless era. So why don't we talk about Remi Moses more? Is football guilty of forgetting the warriors who made victory possible? As the years passed, Moses stepped away from the game. No coaching roles, no media spotlight, just a quiet life away from the sport he once ruled. But for those who truly know football, his name still means something. Maybe he never got the grand farewell. Maybe his name isn't sung by thousands today. But for those who saw him play, Remi Moses remains unforgettable. Football often celebrates the glamorous, the goal scorers, the magicians who leave defenders in the dust. But the game is built on more than just brilliance. It needs warriors, fighters, players who bring balance between skill and sheer will. Remi Moses was one of those players. He played in an era where the midfield battle was won not just with talent, but with heart. He fought for every ball, took every hit, and never backed down from a challenge. Without him, Manchester United's rise under Ron Atkinson would not have been the same. He was the perfect partner to Bryan Robson, the missing piece in a team that needed steel. But fate wasn't kind. A career cut short, a name that slowly faded from mainstream memory. No testimonial, no Hollywood ending, just a player who gave everything until his body gave up on him. Yet true football fans know. They remember the tackles, the interceptions, the presence that made him a nightmare for opponents. They remember how he stood his ground in a brutal era of English football. His story may not have had a fairy tale ending, but his impact cannot be erased. So the question remains, how do we define a legend? Is it trophies, longevity, or is it the undeniable influence they had on their team? Remi Moses might not have the statues, the songs, or the endless debates about his greatness. But for those who saw him play, he was a legend in his own right. And that, in the end, is what truly matters. Football is a game of moments, but it's also a game of those who make those moments possible. Remi Moses wasn't the flashiest name, but he was the foundation, the fighter, the player who did the dirty work so others could shine. But history has a habit of forgetting players like him. No grand farewell, no endless tributes, just a quiet exit from the sport he gave everything to. Maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time we remember the warriors, not just the goal scorers. If you believe football should never forget players like Remi Moses, make sure his story is heard. Share this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold football stories. Because some legacies deserve to be remembered.